This is Walter Bosley, and I'm going to read a selection from The Roswell UFO Crash, What They Don't Want You to Know, by KAL KORFF. The day after Roswell, Colonel Corso's literary hoax. In mid-June 1997, in a deliberate move to capitalize on the 50th anniversary of the widely believed but mythical Roswell UFO crash, U.S. Army Colonel Philip J. Corso authored a book called The Day After Roswell. Co-written with William Burns, the book's basic premise was not only that Roswell involved the secret recovery of an alien spacecraft, but that such inventions as the microprocessor and fiber optics were the direct result of so-called reverse engineering of alien technologies from the event at Roswell. Corso not only made these claims, but boasted that he had personally handled some of the so-called alien artifacts, and that he was directly responsible for their eventually successful technology transfer to private industry. When The Day After Roswell was published, it garnered major headlines across the country and became an instant national bestseller, earning a spot briefly even on the New York Times list. Suffice it to say, Corso's incredible claims received global attention, and to help boost the credibility of his book, the first printing even included an introductory foreword written by none other than U.S. Senator Strom Thurmond. For the pro-E.T. Roswell crowd, Corso's words were music to their ears, and to this day, naive email postings singing praises of the late Colonel's claims can still be found on the internet if one searches. Unfortunately, as this appendix proves, The Day After Roswell turned out to be yet another hoax in the case, the most elaborate literary tale to date, second only to the monstrous hoax of the so-called alien autopsy film. On July 4th, 1997, I was invited to be a special guest all day on the MSNBC network. Like hundreds of other reporters and journalists, MSNBC had set up camp in Roswell, New Mexico, and was broadcasting live throughout the day to millions of viewers across the country. Hosted by news anchorman John Williams, the show was scheduled to present former Lieutenant Walter Haut, Captain James McAndrew from the U.S. Air Force, Colonel Joe Kittinger, also formerly of the Air Force, and Colonel Corso. Upon learning that Corso was scheduled for the show, I immediately accepted MSNBC's invitation and looked forward to debating and exposing him. I knew that Project Mogul, as this book has shown, was the real and true explanation for what had been recovered near Roswell. Additionally, with my background and years of service earning a living in the personal computing industry professionally, I was familiar with the history and the development of the microprocessor and knew that it had not been invented by anyone's copying its design from extraterrestrials who happened to crash their ship in 1947. Furthermore, all the technologies Corso was claiming were alien in origin were easily traceable through simple searches at the U.S. Patent Office, and it was quite clear that their origins were strictly earthly. When MSNBC informed Colonel Corso that I was going to be present on the show and would hit him hard with the evidence and photos of mogul debris, Corso abruptly canceled and never showed up for the debate. Thus, my chance to expose him in front of millions of potential consumers, cautioning them against spending their hard-earned money supporting claims that were marketed to the masses as being true but weren't, would never materialize. This was the first of several opportunities to debate me directly and in front of the public that Corso declined to accept. Using the convenient excuse of being ill, Corso outright refused to debate, yet he managed to find the time somehow to appear repeatedly on uncritical shows and at public gatherings that never questioned his claims. Corso's sudden decision to back out of the arrangement for the debate upset MSNBC, and rightly so, because one of its partner networks and television shows, NBC's highly rated and popular Dateline, had widely promoted the release of Corso's book. Colonel Corso's Roswell tall tales begin to unravel. Although Corso and I never debated, He died of a heart attack more than a year later on July 16, 1998. I did have a chance to confront his co-author, William Burns. Burns and I were invited to appear on the highly popular, nationally syndicated radio program, The Laura Lee Show. Laura Lee's program not only can be heard on the internet, but reaches virtually all of North America, including Canada. Burns was on the show via telephone hookup, while I was in Laura Lee's broadcast studios sitting directly across from her. Lee billed the show as Roswell UFO Crash or Project Mogul, an appropriate title. Burns was given his turn first for roughly an hour, and he laid out all the so-called evidence cited in their book. I was given the second hour and went over the strong evidence for Mogul and discussed the weakness present in the pro-alien Roswell argument. Then Laura Lee opened the show up to both of us and callers. It turned out that Burns was unprepared for an in-depth debate. Almost immediately I asked Burns if he had ever bothered conducting his own independent research into Roswell prior to helping Corso write his book. Burns replied that he had not, and he admitted that until he got the book contract, he had not really known anything about Roswell. I felt it was important to question him on this point before the huge radio audience, because when I heard Burns cite myth after myth about Roswell, it was obvious to me that his Roswell knowledge left much to be desired. Burns was citing Roswell evidence that not only had been refuted years earlier, but was not even advocated any longer by prominent Roswell supporters. One example was when Burns cited the myth that top military brass had suddenly changed their schedules and diverted to New Mexico because of the spaceship crash near Roswell. As shown earlier in this book, this is not true. And I told Burns this, citing a formerly declassified memo that proved his statement to be false. I realized that Burns was unversed about even the basics of Roswell. Coupled with his admission that he had done no independent investigations of his own, nor had he even bothered to double-check any of Corso's claims, the debate turned out to be one-sided. Burns was out of his element, and he lost very badly. By the end of 1997, the issue of whether Colonel Corso's claims were false was no longer in debate. While Corso continued to duck not only me, but anyone else who could expose him, veteran UFO researcher Brad Sparks released an article that proved beyond question that Corso's version of events could not possibly have taken place. The following are excerpts from Sparks' report, which I purchased the publication rights to immediately following his completion of it. And I quote, "The only thing extraterrestrial in Philip Corso's book The Day After Roswell is the height of his tall tales, certainly the tallest Roswell tales in any book on the subject. His thesis, of course, is that many of our high-tech advances, such as microcircuits and the transistor before integrated circuits, lasers, fiber optics, microwave ovens, Star Wars SDI weapons, etc., all actually came from reverse engineering, the alien technology found in the crashed UFO near Roswell, New Mexico, in July of 1947, a feat largely made possible by Corso himself, when he purportedly divided up the alien goodies while working at Army R&D in the early 60s. However, in his haste to cash in on Roswell mania, Philip Corso has made some fantastic blunders of history that completely expose him as a rank literary fraud in a most embarrassing way. Corso just can't resist putting himself at the center stage of great events of history, courted by the big names such as Robert Kennedy and his old friend J. Edgar Hoover. Corso's other book is called I Walked with Giants, and he is ever the powerful hero, but he trips on his way up the ladder to the stage. Corso has apparently made a cynical calculation that he'll be able to make his money and retreat before anyone can develop a sufficient publicity base to expose him. So there was no need to research his claims to get them perfect. The only thing he has carefully avoided is getting trapped into endorsing a particular Roswell crash site or timeline from the multitude now being promoted. He can't clarify the confusion for us because he pretends he doesn't remember too clearly these elementary details of the date and location of what he claims is the single most important event in human history, to say nothing of his military career, even though he claims he had 2 years to pore over the top-secret Roswell files every day while at Army R&D headquarters. Instead, all he really knows is what happened the so-called day after Roswell, starting from when the alien material was transported, hence the title of the book. How convenient. Corso tells us how he personally intimidated the CIA director of covert operations to get him to stop his CIA agents from following him around. This is part of Corso's story of how he got the job of exploiting alien technology as head of the Foreign Technology Desk of Army R&D in early 1961. The alien microchips and other technology had been recovered from Roswell decades earlier, but gathered dust in one filing cabinet, together with extensive files and documents on the case, until Corso came along and claims he figured out what to do with it. A couple of days, as he said, before he was officially expected to begin at the Pentagon, he was led through backdoor means to meet his new boss and old friend, Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau, head of Army R&D. His military records indicate he arrived at Army R&D headquarters in the Pentagon from Baltimore on May 5, 1961. This was supposedly done so that no one would know officially that Corso was inside the Pentagon yet, and so he wouldn't be followed. Corso asked why he couldn't go through the front door. Trudeau allegedly replied, "Because they're already watching you, Phil." Thus Corso learned he was being tailed by CIA personnel, but he was determined not to play along. Corso claims he marched right past a startled secretary and into the office of the CIA Director of Covert Operations, Frank Wisner, at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and told him off. As indicated above, this must have been a couple of days, as he said, after the initial meeting with General Trudeau in early May 1961. Keep this date in mind as you read on, as it explodes Corso's story as a pile of fiction. Corso claims he warned the CIA ops director that he would start carrying a gun, and if he ever found a CIA man following him again, the agent's body would later be found with bullet holes in his head. Later in 1961, this CIA covert ops director himself was found dead by hanging in a London hotel room, the victim of suicide, Corso claims. The problem is that Frank G. Wisner, not Wisner, had been hospitalized and replaced as top CIA covert operator nearly 3 years earlier in August 1958. First by acting covert operations director Richard M. Helms, and then by Wisner's permanent replacement Richard M. Bissell on January 1st, 1959. Thus, Bissell was the actual CIA chief of clandestine service, or ops, serving in 1961 at the time alleged in Corso's tale. Bissell is famous in history as the leader of the U-2 and the Corona spy satellite projects at the CIA, as well as the architect of the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion that had dominated the headlines for the past few weeks before Corso claims he arrived at the Pentagon in 1961. Thus, it is surprising that the supposed intelligence expert Corso has such a poor grasp of intelligence history as to not know these well-known facts. Bissell's name was repeatedly cited as the chief planner of the Bay of Pigs operation in front-page news stories at the time. Indeed, a May 3rd front-page story from even the New York Times reported that CIA Deputy Director Bissell and CIA Director Alan Dulles had testified the day before at a closed-door hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee concerning the Cuba disaster. I interviewed Bissell almost 20 years ago about his UFO involvement in Project Corona, and naturally he never mentioned either Corso or Roswell. Corso should have known who Bissell was for another reason, namely that he claims, falsely of course, that the Project Corona spy satellite program was handed over to him in 1961, and that was Bissell's project. More about this below. Worse still, Wisner's office was not even in the U.S. in 1961, but was in London. Wisner, whom Corso called Wisner, had been sent overseas to take the less demanding post of CIA Chief of Station in London on August 6, 1959, but was recalled from London in the spring of 1962 and resigned from the CIA entirely in August 1962. Corso could not have simply driven to Wisner's office in 1961 and barged in, as if we're to believe that Corso could get through CIA security so easily to reach the top spook in the agency and threaten him. It is also public knowledge that the new CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia was not yet open for business in May 1961, when Corso's claimed confrontation with the top CIA spook supposedly took place there. The new building did not receive its first CIA employees until September 1961. Did Corso push his way past construction workers into an unoccupied office to be? Maybe he just camped out there and waited for all the walls and furnishings to be filled in and for so-called Wisner to pick up the right office. Worst of all, Frank Wisner did not hang himself in a London hotel in 1961. Instead, he killed himself with a shotgun on his family farm in Galena, Maryland, on October 29, 1965, years after Corso claims it was, and on the wrong side of the Atlantic Ocean for Corso's version to be true. There's no need to add to the Wisner family tragedy with preposterous stories linking him to extraterrestrial investigations, distorting the sad details of his demise, and even falsely accusing him of being one of the best friends, so to speak, the Soviets ever had, as Corso claims. The truth is, Wisner had been depressed since the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, which he had helped inspire as the top CIA clandestine official, only to see it brutally suppressed. Eisenhower refused to overtly intervene or covertly assist the brave freedom fighters who were crushed by Soviet tanks, and Wisner never recovered from his personal anguish over what he felt was a betrayal. If anyone was a real hero, it was Wisner, not Philip Corso. Wisner could have chosen the life of a rich playboy, but instead threw himself into service for his country, whereas others gave mere lip service to the rollback of the Iron Curtain. Wisner personally did more to roll it back than practically anyone in his era. And when plans failed and courageous freedom fighters were bloodied or tortured, Wisner saw and felt their anguish, and it took a terrible toll on him personally until it killed him. These are not minor errors of abstract historical facts. These are stories of Corso's own alleged personal experiences involving supposed major episodes, as he puts it, in his career and in world history. Corso again fraudulently inserts himself into history by alleging that as the Army Foreign Technology Czar in charge of Roswell, he helped President Kennedy decide to send a man to the moon. Corso alleges that he worked on a moon-based plan called Project Horizon to help keep the ETs at bay, which plan he urged on Attorney General Robert Kennedy in a personal meeting in May 1962. Lo and behold, says Corso, it was a short time later that Robert Kennedy's brother, the president, announced the Apollo program objective of landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Corso takes pride in his supposed contribution to Kennedy's decision on the moon race. Only problem is that JFK made the famous Moon Project announcement on May 25th of 1961, a year before the alleged Corso promotion of Project Horizon to Bobby Kennedy in May 1962. Corso can't seriously claim he simply made a typo or error of 1 year and meant to say it was May 1961, because that would mean he had secured a personal meeting with the brother of the president only days after he arrived at the Pentagon, and before he had even finished his first alleged Roswell exploitation plan, which included the Horizon moon base. Corso indicates it took more than a month to complete his first report and plan for General Trudeau, and it was already summer, then so it had to be at least June or July 1961. He also states explicitly it was after his first year in office, meaning after January 1962, that President Kennedy saw the value in Project Horizon through Corso's pitch to Brother Bobby in May 1962 meeting, and it had been 6 months from that meeting to the Cuban Missile Crisis of the fall of 1962. So that doubly fixes the alleged meeting in the spring of 1962, not 1961. Corso is tightly locked into his 1962 date for his fictitious involvement in inspiring JFK's 1961 Apollo lunar landing plan, and there is no way out, except to admit it's all a fantasy. Corso's fictional timeline is 1 year too late. Why doesn't Corso present written records proving the subject matter, date, and existence of the Kennedy meeting? This would be far more important evidence to support his claims than padding his book with several dozen pages of irrelevant Project Horizon technical documentation, none of which mentions ETs or UFOs or Roswell. Corso claims that in his first Roswell exploitation plan to General Trudeau, which, as we've seen, must have been submitted in June or July 1961, he claims he stressed how the Roswell aliens were so well protected and equipped for a long-term spaceflight, unlike the experiences of both American and Soviet astronauts who had had difficulties with weightlessness in the space environment. While this claim also sounds impressive, the fact is that when Corso purportedly made his report on this subject, only one person had been in orbit: Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, who was up in outer space for roughly 90 minutes on April 12, 1961. The fact is, the Soviets released nothing at the time indicating any difficulties with human adaptation to spaceflight, so Corso could not possibly have known this information at that time. Not only is time warped in Corso's claims with his Wisner-Wisner fable and the Kennedy moonshot fabrication, which are years off in date physically, in impossible ways, but so is space. He has a possible Roswell UFO crash site on the plains of San Augustine in some proximity, so to speak, to the Roswell Army Airfield. In truth, this location is at least 160 miles away west of Socorro. A simple look at a map confirms this. Logic goes out the window, too, as when Corso mystifyingly states in one place that only 5 to 6 of us in all 3 military services were privy to the Roswell secrets. Yet he tells how the Roswell package spread out further and further among the services over the years with little or no coordination. Moreover, there were the several military members of the MJ-12 committee in control of the cover-up of Roswell who additionally, as Corso said, had personnel stationed at the Pentagon to keep tabs on what the military was doing on Roswell R&D. There were military pathologists at Walter Reed, Bethesda, and Roswell Army Air Base who allegedly performed autopsies on the alien bodies. There were so-called military intelligence personnel developing cattle mutilation surgical methods, claims Corso, and there must have been many military technicians involved in the test flights of the Roswell craft at Norton Air Force Base, Edwards, and Nellis Air Force bases, as Corso claims. And quite a few military administrators of the purported Alien Technology Museum, the final resting place of the Roswell spacecraft, as Corso claims, maintained by the Air Force and the CIA. In fact, Corso later contradicts himself by claiming there were a large number of people who really know the truth about Roswell, such as top-ranking military officers. Yet we are meant to believe the Roswell secret had spread out to only 5 to 6 military men after 15 years. That's a large number. Corso can't have it both ways. If they had that few after that many years, how many did they start with in charge of the Roswell spacecraft? 0? Maybe that's the real truth slipping out by inference. It started with 0 because it never happened. Typical of Corso's absurd anachronisms that prove he doesn't know what he's talking about on military and intelligence history is his listing of the members of the MJ-12 working group as of the middle of September 1947. He has obviously lifted this list carelessly from the published pro-MJ-12 sources without bothering to verify the facts. He is careful to note the exact transitional positions in 1947 that General Twining was in the Army Air Force, then the U.S. Air Force. General Vandenberg was Central Intelligence Group Director, then U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff in 1948, etc. But Gordon Gray is described in mid-September 1947 by Corso as President Truman's Secretary of the Army. He was actually Undersecretary in 1947, and Chairman of the CIA's Psychological Strategy Board. The Psychological Strategy Board was a division of the National Security Council, not the CIA, and it did not exist in 1947. The PSB was created on April 4th, 1951. Corso should have known this from his tour of duty at the NSC in the early 1950s. Another bogus Corso achievement mentioned earlier is his purported takeover of Project Corona, the pioneer U.S. spy satellite. Corso attempts to steal all the credit for Corona, but if you read his timeline carefully, most of the major R&D and cover story actions took place in 1960, long before he ever arrived on the scene. Corso has done a poor job of reading up on space history, as his errors attest. He claims the most clever innovation was when the Air Force managed to sneak the Corona camera payload on board an already existing NASA civilian satellite project called Discoverer, which was difficult because it had to be small enough to fit into the interior easily and be self-contained. He imagines that this whole ludicrous endeavor of one agency hiding payloads aboard another agency's satellites was necessitated by NASA assuming control of, as he said, all satellite launchings, including the military's launches, when NASA was created in 1958. A control that purportedly lasted until the 1970s. The truth is that Corona was entirely a secret CIA, not Air Force program, begun several months before NASA was even formed. Corona was ordered by President Eisenhower on February 7, 1958, and NASA's first day of operation was on October 1st. The cover for the satellites was the Air Force's Discoverer label, which never had anything to do with NASA. It was always publicly associated with the Air Force. NASA never had control of the military satellite launchings. The existence of an Air Force satellite launch pad, completely separate from NASA's Cape Canaveral, should settle it. Further proof of Corso's complete ignorance of the Corona project lays in the fact that he invents the following remark by General Trudeau in early 1963, purportedly declaring, quoting, "In just a couple of years, we'll have orbiting satellites mapping every inch of the Soviet Union," end quote. Corona satellites had already mapped the USSR by 1963 and proved the non-existence of the so-called missile gap, showing there was no huge Soviet ICBM force hidden in Siberia or some other place. You can now even read the official history of CIA's Corona satellite on the internet, and millions of frames of its space reconnaissance photos are now declassified and available to the public. Obviously, Corso has a very poor grasp of the Corona satellite's function and operational history. Corso was also the hero of the Cuban Missile Crisis, naturally, Reagan's SDI, or Strategic Defense Initiative, the Korean War POW revelations, the exposure of KGB moles inside the CIA and elsewhere, and the JFK assassination as an investigator for the Warren Commission, which he intimates was due to JFK finding out the truth about the CIA, implying that the agency had him killed. And of course, last but not least, Corso is the hero of the planet Earth's desperate but successful war against the ETs. This supposed war against UFOs led to Reagan and Gorbachev meeting and ending the Cold War. We had negotiated a surrender treaty with the aliens, until we were able to reverse engineer enough Roswell weapons to fight back. As Corso modestly boasts, quoting, "Sometimes, once in a very long while, you get the chance to save your country, your planet, and even your species at the same time." End quote. This comment by Corso speaks for itself. Now that we've established that Corso fabricates entire stories and dialogues involving himself inside CIA headquarters and elsewhere, that never happened and never could have happened, there really is no need to go into the rest of his tales about his heroic role in getting U.S. industry to reverse engineer microchips, fiber optics, lasers, Kevlar, etc. from his make-believe Roswell spacecraft. Now, that would be chasing phantoms, trying to prove a negative, that something doesn't exist, which is inherently very difficult, if not actually impossible. The dramatic stories that we can easily check cast serious doubt as to the veracity of Corso's claims. That's the end of the article, returning to KAL KORFF's narrative. After the publication of Corso's book on Roswell, he began working on a second treatise titled The Day After Dallas, which, like his Roswell claims, followed the same formulas. Once again, Corso was the unsung hero of the Warren Commission, and in this book he promised to blow open the truth about the assassination of President Kennedy. Corso's death from heart failure because of old age prevented this work from getting completed or really even started to any significant degree. The media were spared yet another literary hoax, one that would have undoubtedly been as sensational, so to speak, as his blatant attempts to cash in on the popularity of the Roswell UFO crash myth. It's just a shame that it took the death of a man to prevent the further distortion of history for the sake of profit. I'm Walter Bosley, and I've just read a selection from The Roswell UFO Crash, What They Don't Want You to Know, by KAL Korff.